A scientist from the future travels back in time to gather data on a virus that wiped out 99% of the human population. In an airport, a terrified boy watches a man being killed. The boy sees a blonde woman rushing toward the dead man. Later, the man wakes up in a cell, hearing a female voice announce a list of selected volunteers, and his number is called. A neighboring inmate speculates that he might get a pardon, but the man isn't convinced. As he prepares to leave, he uses a special hook device to escape through the cell roof. In a special room, he puts on a spacesuit, following the instructions that it must be completely sealed for safety. If the suit is compromised, there's no coming back. After being thoroughly disinfected, he opens the hatch and finds himself on a desolate, ruined surface. He starts collecting insects in containers. Suddenly, he hears a roar and sees a bear, but the bear just walks away. He continues gathering samples and enters an old shopping mall. After collecting what he needs, he starts heading back and notices a message in the snow. Brushing it off, he sees a red emblem and the words "We did it." Looking up, he spots a lion on the roof of a building. Back at the base, he's cleaned, disinfected, and his blood is analyzed. Guards then bring him to a group of scientists who ask him to sit in a chair that resembles an electric chair. As soon as he sits, his hands are shackled, and the chair lifts him up. The scientists tell him they're pleased with his work and offer him a new project. If he succeeds, he'll be granted amnesty. In Baltimore, April 1990, a woman is at an art lecture when her pager goes off, prompting her to leave. She goes to the police station, where a detective tells her about a man who appeared in the street, nearly naked and disoriented. They brought him in, and although he started mumbling about viruses, they thought he was on drugs, but his tests came back clean. The woman, Dr. Catherine Riley, reads the man's name in the file and goes to see him in his cell. He's heavily sedated and only mumbles about needing fresh air without microbes. Dr. Riley tells him it's now April 1990. James is transferred to a psychiatric hospital, cleaned, checked for parasites, and dressed before joining the other patients. One of the staff members, Jeffrey Goins, offers to give a tour for a fee and explains the facility. James asks to make a call, but Jeffrey tells him it's not possible. James meets other patients and later appears before a panel of doctors. He tries to explain that he isn't insane and has information they don't know. He talks about a virus that will kill 5 billion people by the end of 1995, leaving less than 1% of the population alive. He says he wants to find the army of the 12 monkeys to learn more about the virus and help survivors. The doctors don't believe him. James then asks to leave a message for the future to prove he was sent to the wrong time. Reluctantly, they agree. James dials the number, but a woman with children answers, and she has no idea what he's talking about. Catherine tries to find out where James is from, but he gets agitated. The number is for 1996, so it doesn't work. James dreams again of the airport, the murdered man, and the blonde woman. He wakes up in the ward and waits for the staff to leave. He examines the window, but Jeffrey from the neighboring bed tells him it's barred and won't open. Jeffrey talks about microbes, claiming they didn't exist 200 years ago, and now everyone believes in them. He says he knows how to escape and offers to help James, but he himself doesn't want to escape, as he has arranged for people to tell his father, who will rescue him. As Jeffrey talks, James catches a spider and tries to hide it but ends up swallowing it. Jeffrey then starts shouting loudly, waking the other patients and attracting the doctor's attention. They calm him down. In the common room of the psychiatric hospital, the television shows experiments being conducted on animals. Jeffrey, outraged by the treatment, expresses his anger, and James agrees with him. Another patient, hearing their conversation, excitedly embraces the idea that humanity might deserve destruction. Later, Jeffrey gives James a key to escape. While Jeffrey creates a commotion to distract the staff, James uses the key and starts to leave. Although the tranquilizers slow him down, he manages to make it down a few floors. Unfortunately, he's soon found and surrounded by doctors and staff. After being heavily sedated, the psychiatrists chain him to a bed and lock him in solitary confinement. In the doctor's office, Catherine and the other doctors are meeting when a nurse arrives to report that James has disappeared from his cell. Despite being heavily sedated and restrained, he managed to escape. James dreams again of the airport and wakes up hearing a strange voice calling him Bob and asking if he has learned anything about the army of the 12 monkeys. James responds that he was sent to the wrong year. At that moment, a guard comes in and takes him to meet with the panel of scientists. The scientists play a recording and ask James if he left a message for them. He denies knowing anything about it and insists he couldn't have left the message. He repeats that he was sent to the wrong year and ended up in a psychiatric hospital. The doctors then show him a sign and photos of various people, asking if he recognizes anyone. James spots Jeffrey Goins in one of the photos, and the scientists decide to send James back to the past. James wakes up amidst military conflict, surrounded by people speaking an unfamiliar language. He hears familiar speech and sees Jose, a former prison mate, who asks for help. James tries to crawl towards him but is shot in the leg and then time travels again. In Baltimore, November 1996, Catherine gives a presentation on Cassandra syndrome and promotes her book. After the lecture, a man approaches her during the book signing, complimenting her on debunking alarmists while mentioning theories about humanity's potential destruction. Catherine dismisses his comments. Later, as Catherine heads to her car, a man grabs her from behind and forces her into the vehicle. Thinking it's a robbery, she offers him everything she has, but he demands they drive to Philadelphia. Catherine realizes the man is James Cole, who escaped from the hospital 6 years ago. She assumes he has been stalking her, but James denies it and shows her a poster of her lecture. He explains that he came to her because she promised to help, and they need to go to Philadelphia because he believes the army of the 12 monkeys is there, not in Baltimore. While driving, James asks to turn on the radio. A song he likes plays, and his behavior unsettles Catherine. During breaks between songs, the news reports a missing boy who might be alive and trapped in a well. At Catherine's home, her parents give statements to the police. On their answering machine, they hear a message from the boy stating that James Cole has returned and is looking for Catherine. At a hotel, James sleeps and dreams again of the airport. When he wakes up, he finds Catherine tied up on the adjacent bed, visibly scared. He tells her she appeared in his dream, though with a different hairstyle. Catherine asks about the dream and pleads to be untied, but James refuses, takes her money, and heads to a vending machine. Meanwhile, Catherine sees on the news that they are wanted. James and Catherine continue their journey. James explains that he needs to find the virus in its original form so a scientist from his time can study it and develop a vaccine. The radio reports again about the missing boy, and James says he used to worry about him but now believes everything will be fine, dismissing it as a hoax. On the road, James notices something on a wall and demands that Catherine stop the car. She complies, and while he tears down posters, she attempts to leave. His shouting makes her stop, and she gets out to check the symbols, which turn out to be just scribbles. They then encounter an old man who recognizes Cole as one of the time travelers and calls him Bob. The old man says that scientists hide transmitters in their teeth to track volunteers. After pushing the old man away, James follows a red trail, leading them into a building where they run into gangsters. James fights and kills them. James and Catherine dash outside and spot a building adorned with a pig's head, just like the one in the photo the scientist showed him. He realizes they've found the right place. Inside, they encounter 2 men and a woman. The group doesn't know anything about the army of the 12 monkeys. James, resorting to threats, pressures them until they reveal what they know about Jeffrey Goins. They explain that Jeffrey, who became a media sensation for protesting outside his father's lab, quickly grew bored and wanted more excitement. He and 11 others broke away to form the army of the 12 monkeys, initially planning to hunt humans. However, Jeffrey betrayed them by calling a press conference where he praised his father's experiments and announced he would work at the lab to prevent animal suffering. While they talk, James finds a notebook. James and Catherine switch to another car. As they drive, Catherine tries to convince James that he's been deluding himself and believing his own lies. The radio announces a search for a man and a kidnapped woman. James, not wanting to hear it, turns off the radio. His gunshot wound is worsening. He tells Catherine he was injured during the war, but she doesn't believe him, so it seems irrelevant. She persuades him to stop at a gas station to remove the bullet and treat the wound. They stop in a forest where Catherine treats James's wound. She suggests he turn himself in, but he refuses. James hides under a car near a mansion where a party is underway. Jeffrey is among the guests. A guard informs Jeffrey that someone he knows has arrived. When James approaches, Jeffrey pretends not to recognize him at first. However, when James mentions the 12 monkeys, Jeffrey invites him to dinner. Upstairs, James demands the virus, but Jeffrey appears confused, insisting the virus was James's idea. James angrily explains that humanity now lives underground and the world belongs to cats and dogs. Their argument is interrupted by security, who capture James. He manages to fight them off and escape. Back in the forest, James opens the trunk of the car to find Catherine locked inside. Once freed, Catherine attacks James, accusing him of causing Jeffrey to destroy humanity with the idea he got in the hospital. Exhausted by his claims, she begs him to surrender. Hearing police sirens, she tries to attract their attention. Suddenly, James vanishes. Catherine gives a statement to the police, claiming that James saved her from a gang and needs help. The next day, the news reports that the missing boy has been found. It turns out he was never missing. His friends admitted it was a prank, and he had been hiding in a shed nearby. James wakes up to find scientists around him. They're pleased with his work but have placed him in a hospital due to his unstable state. He's been granted a full pardon. However, James is clearly disoriented and starts shouting that the people around him aren't real, leading the doctors to sedate him. Catherine visits her supervisor at the psychiatric hospital, trying to prove that James wasn't insane and that everything he said was true. She insists that he knew about the missing boy, which means 5 billion people are at risk. Her supervisor dismisses her concerns as mere stress-induced delusions. Meanwhile, James regains consciousness and hears a strange voice again. The voice expresses a desire to see the sky and ocean, be up high, breathe fresh air, and be with Catherine. Catherine wakes up to the phone ringing. The detective informs her that the ballistic analysis of the bullet she handed over showed it was from World War I. She leaps out of bed to check the photos in her book and finds a picture of a wounded soldier with James next to him. Catherine is stunned, struggling to process the connection. James is once again before the Council of Scientists, requesting to go back to 1996 to complete his mission. Catherine calls Dr. Goines to ask about the army of the 12 monkeys. He denies knowing anything about it and reassures her that she's worrying unnecessarily. He's the only one handling dangerous microorganisms. After the call, Goines instructs his assistant to increase security at the lab and assigns Peters to manage it. The Council of Scientists briefs James on his mission. They inform him that the first symptoms of the virus were recorded in Philadelphia on December 13, 1996, suggesting that's when the virus was released. It then spread to San Francisco, New Orleans, Rio de Janeiro, Rome, Kinshasa, Karachi, Bangkok, and Beijing. Catherine returns to the Army of the 12 Monkeys office. She requests to be let in, but Jeffrey and his team, who appear to be preparing for something, refuse to open the door. Realizing she won't get in, Catherine starts writing on the office wall with spray paint. Suddenly, she hears a voice calling her name and turns to see James. He's clearly disoriented, and Catherine leads him away from the police. Inside the office, a member of Jeffrey's team worries that Jeffrey may have shared their plans with Catherine. Jeffrey dismisses this, claiming that the 12 monkeys didn't even exist in his mind while he was in the hospital. He theorizes that the doctors studied his brain, then used the data to create a model that predicted his thoughts and actions for the next decade. This, he believes, is how Catherine knew about the army of the 12 monkeys. Catherine skillfully evades the patrols with James, and they check into a hotel room for an hour. In the room, Catherine tries to get James to recall details, but he remembers nothing and insists he's mentally ill. She pleads with him to remember, as his warnings about the impending disaster are true. During their conversation, an unknown man bursts into the room, attacking Catherine and accusing her of interfering with his work. James intervenes, knocking the man down and dragging him into the bathroom. There, he uses a knife to extract a tooth with a transmitter from himself. The commotion attracts attention, and the police are called. When the police burst in, they only find the man in the bathroom. Meanwhile, Catherine and James leave the hotel and get off a bus. Catherine heads to a phone booth to dial the number. James looks around and realizes they are at the same mall where he previously collected samples. Catherine returns a few minutes later, relieved but frustrated. She called the number, but it turned out to be for a carpet cleaning service. She left a message on their answering machine. As James recounts the message, he starts finishing her sentences, even though he was too far away to hear. He confirms that he heard it in his own time. They hide from the police, then go into a store to buy clothes and wigs. A van arrives at the building, and Jeffrey's team unloads a large bundle. Jeffrey drags his father into the vehicle. His father recognizes him but realizes it's too late, they won't make it to his lab. Moreover, he's now convinced that Jeffrey is truly insane. Catherine and James are sitting in a movie theater. Catherine's putting makeup on James, and he's puzzled, asking why she's doing this. She tells him that everything will make sense in a couple of weeks, and if she's wrong, they'll turn themselves into the police. Jeffrey and his team have just arrived at the zoo. James dreams again about the airport. When he wakes up, he realizes he's dozed off in the theater and Catherine is missing. Panicked, he searches for her and finds her in the lobby. She's now a blonde and has booked tickets to the beach. Seeing her, James tells her she's always been a part of his dreams. The next morning, all the zoo animals are roaming freely in the city. James and Catherine are in a taxi when the driver mentions the latest stunt by the army of the 12 monkeys. They released all the zoo animals and locked Dr. Goines in a cage. Jeffrey was with them. James feels a wave of relief, realizing they aren't involved with the virus. At the airport, police officers are handing out fugitive portraits to the staff. James and Catherine arrive, and James recognizes the place from his dream. He says he was here about a week before the outbreak began. Catherine tells him to stay calm or they'll get arrested. She suggests they meet by the newspaper kiosk while she gets the tickets. James agrees, but first heads to the payphones to leave a message. He says the army of the 12 monkeys isn't responsible. Someone else released the virus, and he's completed his mission and isn't coming back. At the ticket counter, a man is buying tickets to several cities: San Francisco, New Orleans, Rio de Janeiro, Rome, Kinshasa, Karachi, Bangkok, and Beijing. The clerk is surprised by the long list, but the man just says it's for work. James goes to the restroom to fix his peeling mustache and hears a strange voice telling him he mustn't stay in this time. He bursts into a stall, thinking the voice's owner is there, but only a frightened man runs out, confused about what James wants. Outside the restroom, Jose approaches James and hands him a gun. He says James is a hero, his message was heard, and events have been restored. James has to finish the job by killing the culprit. Catherine waits by the newspaper kiosk and spots a magazine cover with a photo of Dr. Goines and his assistant, Peters. She suddenly puts everything together. Jose tries to convince James to go through with his mission, warning him that if he doesn't, he'll have to kill Catherine. James looks around and sees other time travelers, realizing he's out of options. Just then, Catherine rushes up to James, saying she's seen Peters, the scientist's assistant, who's obsessed with destroying the world. They both hurry to find him. Meanwhile, Peters is going through security screening for his luggage. After scanning his bag, the worker asks to see the contents. Peters opens his bag, showing a permit for biological samples, but the worker insists on checking the vials. At the airport, a boy arrives with his parents. James and Catherine struggle to reach Peters, but they're held back by the crowd. In a desperate move, Catherine spots Peters and shouts for him to be detained because he's carrying a dangerous virus. Unfortunately, no one seems to pay her any mind. James finally breaks free from the throng and starts chasing Peters, pulling out his gun as he runs. However, he can't catch up or get a clear shot. As James gets closer, arriving police officers open fire on him, and he falls, killed in front of a young boy. This boy is James Cole, and the memory of this moment will haunt him in his dreams for the rest of his life. Peters boards a plane, and next to him sits a woman from the future's Council of Scientists. She's outraged by the shooting at the airport and introduces herself as Jones, a specialist in insurance. Young James, sitting in a car with his parents, watches a plane take off through the window. Who do you think is responsible for the tragedy that wiped out humanity? Perhaps if people from the past hadn't tried to alter history, this tragedy might never have occurred?